So this one is on avoiding communications breakdowns, requests, commitments, and holding accountability. And the accountability we're holding is our own. This is about us holding ourselves accountable as we model behavior. We are welcoming the folks from York and Philadelphia, who we did the coach approach to adaptive leadership with last month. So we're delighted to have them here. Also delighted to have our colleagues and partners, Ellen Kagan, who is here amidst moving her house. Moving her house. You want to say something about that, Ellen? I just unmuted you if you want to say hi.
It's a great way to learn how to coach yourself amidst the chaos. So practice every day.
There you go, for all of us. Great. And Alex is here also.
Hi.
He'll be doing the webinar with me. So
Sure
we are
will.
glad you are here. So we're going to start with a brief centering. Very brief. But one of the very most important things, and we know we tell you this every time, so we love it that we're consistent. We are going to just remember, hello, how important it is to be present and centered. We are guessing that you're coming from somewhere else. You're rushing to make this webinar, and you're here. So we want you just to settle into the fact that you've made it. You're here. Let your breath deepen. Put your attention to your feet. We love to do that because we remember that the ground is there. It helps our energy drop. As our breath deepens, what happens is our nervous system slows down. We become more relaxed. And we know that from this relaxed place, we have more choice. We are less reacting out of habit and more able to respond. So inviting you to take just a couple of more deep breaths, enjoy them, and we will start the webinar. All right, so hopefully everybody can see that. I want to just acknowledge that, we talk about communication all the time in our work, and I think it's fair to say that the breakdowns are the things that really get to us. So we thought this would be a lovely thing to be talking about today as we look into really this modeling behavior piece. So let me go to that screen. So the coach approach skills, we talk about these all the time, presence and centering, and we know that this is important. We always start with the presence piece, being centered, listening, clarifying, asking good questions, giving feedback, creating accountability. And we talk a little bit about modeling behavior in the program, but this is a really important one, and this is a really important one, because this is how we let others know what we're really committed to by how we show up. So our focus today is on how we can model the behavior that we're looking for in others and how we can build trust in others by modeling that behavior. We get to the coach approach mindsets and our intention always to help others be successful so they can make decisions independently. To understand what is going on in a situation beyond our assumptions and biases. To offer our support to other people and their continued development. And to be curious and flexible when faced with complexity. And this gets into the whole idea of adaptive leadership and complexity. And because this world is complex, we often experience breakdowns in communication that can result in kind of the big three of communication breakdowns: complaints, disappointments, and loss of trust. And I can tell you a story here. I have a client who, after hearing her story, she would come in and she would go on and on for about 40 minutes with a series of complaints. She was unhappy with the videographer that was doing work for her. She wasn't happy with her supervisor. She wasn't happy with the leadership of the organization. She was just unhappy. And she lived in a world of complaints. Most of the things that were coming out of her mouth were complaints. And so we talked about, what is it like when you live in a world of complaints? A lot can't happen, right, when we live in a world of complaints. If we live in a world of complaints, disappointments, and loss of trust, it's not a pretty place, right? I mean, this is not the kind of world we want to live in. So we want to see, what can we do and what can we model that can help us and others, keep us and others from not living in a world of complaints, disappointments, and loss of trust. And so we have what's called the speech acts. And speech acts, this is something that we teach at Georgetown. I told you all that I am a faculty member of the leadership coaching program at Georgetown. And this idea of speech acts, Fernando Flores is the original thought leader here. We create our relationships and our work based on what we say. Our speech creates actions. And we have two particular speech acts that we're going to be talking about today: requests, commitments, and also this idea of holding ourselves accountable, And the idea here is that we can be more intentional about how we use language to make relationships and work go better. Words matter. Our speech matters. And you think about, making commitments and how we create trust, it's always through words. Now, we have a suggested reading down there in the bottom. I can't show it to you, I don't think, unless you have me on the screen. Alex is showing it. Okay. Alex and I are both showing it. We have Language in the Pursuit of Leadership Excellence. This is by Chalmers Brothers and Vinay Kumar. And it's a terrific book. It's a really great book that gets into these speech acts in a much more thorough way if you're interested in following up. By the way, this webinar is always posted on the PA Cares Partnership website. So if you would like to check it out, we can also send out an email with this information. So why are requests and commitments so important? Because organizations are networks of commitments, human beings who are making and managing promises with each other. Promises, that's a strong word, promises. These promises are made through requests and commitments, but are we clear in our requests? Do we realize that our yes is a promise? This is where breakdowns happen, when we say things that we don't entirely mean, that we say maybe offhand. We have some examples we'll share in the program here. Maybe perhaps you have examples too, that we're not being thoughtful and careful in our language. So elements of effective speech acts. These are what Fernando Flores and Chalmers Brothers and Vinay Kumar are saying are absolutely essential if we're going to have effective communication. That we need a committed speaker, committed and authentic speaker, that we need to be present, we need to be honest, we need to be committed to the conversation. We need a committed and authentic listener. So we need to make sure the listener is paying attention. And as I say, I have a story about myself where I wasn't committed and it had bad consequences. I'll tell you that story later. But that's very important. Otherwise, you have a breakdown. We need to have a clear future action and conditions of satisfaction. Conditions of satisfaction, that's a long way of saying that we're really clear on what outcome we want. What will make us happy in this situation? What are we committed to? How will we know that we've fulfilled on the commitment? What are the conditions of satisfaction? It's very important to be clear on this. It's important to be clear on the time frame, to have great understanding of the context, what's doable and what's not doable, and to be very mindful of our mood. as we go into this conversation. Is our mood one of openness? Is our mood one of frustration? So now I'm going to turn it over to Alex, who's going to walk through the first piece, which is requests.
Sure, thank you. So in the book, I'm just pulling the direct quote, "We want the future to unfold in a different way than it seems to be heading in itself. And in order to put those things into action, we make a request." So if we see things going in one direction, we make requests to try to get things to go in a different direction. So the first bullet point to hit here is that it's especially important to have a conversation before you make a request. So the intention behind this statement is that sometimes when you witness something or you have a perspective, that you can go immediately into the request fix-it mode without having a conversation or investigating or being curious about what else might be going on, what might have caused this that may impact what request you have, or if you even need to make the request at all. So always a good idea to maintain that curiosity. The second point is that authentic requests are questions. So no has to be an acceptable answer to a request. People have to be able to turn you down, or else it's more of a demand than a request. The third is that you understand if they accept or reject your request. If they shrug their shoulders and say yes, that's not so much of a commitment. So you want to make sure that you get a firm understanding if they accept it and reject it. But part of that is making it clear that a rejection of your request has to be okay. So if the request is rejected, ask what they can commit to instead, or what they're going to do differently next time, or what's going to happen so that the future unfolds more in a way that aligns with your values or the values of your organization. Always, as we talk about in the coach approach, we talk about sincerity and authenticity. So it's very important to be sincere in what you're asking for and declare your satisfaction with the request that's delivered. So I like to call that getting your receipt. So make sure that every time you make a request and they fulfill a request, you give them their receipt of, I'm glad that you did this. It's important to me. I noticed that you fulfilled the request. Thank you so much. It means a lot. So make sure you give them that after they fulfilled the requests.
You know, and if I may jump in here, right, the request is such a great way of dealing with complaints, right? So the complaint is an unmade request. That's our opportunity to shift the complaint and to get out of complaint mode.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Disappointments too. I mean, the whole idea of the future going in one direction, there's complaints and disappointment. There's a little bit of a separateness and a powerlessness about things are happening to us. So a request can be, what can we do to sort of empower ourselves to make an impact and change how those things are going?
Yeah.
So here are examples of not really clear requests. And as you look down this list, and I'll go through each one, a lot of these should be relatively familiar, ones that either you've made or the ones that have been made to you. So we won't go each one yet, but I'll just run down each one. I'd like to follow up more frequently. This should have a higher level of quality. Someone should remember to take notes next time. We need to keep the community space clean, and please handle my appointment. These are all requests that people just they'll make, but they have a clear idea of what's in their minds, but they won't communicate that as effectively as something more specific. So that first example could be, I would like you to follow up with me each Tuesday at 4 for a 30-minute meeting. So that sets a very clear expectation, and it's a very clear request. The next one, that should have a higher level of quality. That becomes, I'd like you to review and spell check our material before you send it to me. So they're getting more clear about what review means. Okay, someone should remember to take notes next time. Someone often is, I'd like you to take notes in our supervision meetings going forward. The next, we need to keep the community space clean. Okay, well, what does that mean? Instead, a better request or a more specific request would be, I'd like you to take responsibility for ensuring that everything is picked up and put away and no food is left out, right? Gives a lot more information. It's not just about clean, but maybe there was an incident where there was food left out, and that's the very specific thing, but offers a lot more information. Okay, please handle my 4 o'clock appointment. right? Very unclear. So that can become, I'd like you to let my appointment know that I will be running 10 minutes late, apologize on my behalf, and offer them a drink. So what this does is allows several things. First, it is more specific and therefore more clear of a request. Second, it gives people an opportunity to tell them what they can commit to. So can they do something vague? Sure, but they might do it at still a poor level of quality. Or they might not be able to commit to, for example, a 30-minute meeting, but instead maybe a 15-minute meeting. So because you have a specific request, you can create a conversation. Okay, so now we're going to just do an activity. So think about a current complaint or disappointment that you have with someone or something at work or in your personal life, and just jot down that complaint or disappointment right now. I'll give you a couple seconds to do that, maybe about 20, 30 seconds to do that. So if you have a piece of paper nearby, write that down. If you don't have a piece of paper nearby, just maybe eyes closed and think about that situation. And try to crystallize it as much as you can. Be very clear about your complaint or your disappointment. Okay. And once you have that, think about what might be a specific request that you would like to make to either resolve or make progress on that situation. So remembering that there's a conversation first, remembering that there's always maybe more to learn about a situation before making requests. But what request could you make or could you start with to advance your complaint or disappointment into something that is workable? Maybe not solvable, but workable toward some progress. And write that down or be present and think about that for just a moment. So once we have that, I'm going to open up the lines, and it's going to be for one of two things. So this is my request. Mm-hmm. So please either share, if you could, if this was easy or difficult for you to do, or share your specific request as much as you feel comfortable doing. So we'll open up the lines again to repeat the request. My request is that you share if this exercise was easy or difficult, or sharing your specific request that you wrote down or thought about.
And let's just take one or two or max three as you offer. How this went for you?
I'll share. This is Tara James.
Hi, Tara.
Hi, how are you? Well, it made the conversation easier, actually, because when I'm thinking about having to address one of my staff members who is a really wonderful staff member, she's a great clinician, a great case manager, and really does quality work, but her hours are very low. The conversation does evoke a little bit of anxiety for me, because it really is highlighting kind of a flaw that has to be addressed, or disappointment. But having to be specific rather than just saying, okay, the expectation is that you increase your billable hours to X. I think that making it more specific, like you're challenging us to do, saying having more of a plan in that request. So it's not just saying that I would like you to have X amount of hours increased, but how can we do this? So the request is perhaps meeting with 6 families per week, 2 or 3 times a week, for at least 1.5 hours. Makes the conversation a lot easier than being general and vague and assuming they understand my expectations.
Great, excellent. And that, as we talked about earlier, being specific says, can you meet with the 6 families? That's a more tangible thing for someone to say, yes, they can do that. They can even do maybe more than that, or they can say, 6 is tough and here's why. And that's a conversation that you wouldn't have had unless you were that specific in your request. So that's great. Somebody else.
I can share something. So you said personal too. So I had to have a conversation with my husband, and I think it's different because you don't have goals that you have to, there are certain plans that you can delay or ignore. So we had a conversation, and I made a request. He said no unless these are my conditions. And I don't agree with that. I was going to ignore it. So it was very difficult to jot this down. And I said, okay, I opened myself and I said, if we discuss it, should I just close it by saying, I understand and I accept your response to these? Which probably will be either opening him to explore if there are other options, or just respecting him and understand that he's just said no.
Great. So do you feel like you're clear on your next step?
Yeah, I have to accept what he said. He wants me to do something else. It's like a family business. He wants me to ask something else, but I think I will leave it as accepting his response.
Okay. Great.
Which is hard.
Yeah, but that.
Oh, Alex, I muted you, honey. Sorry.
I know, that's okay. That's acceptance is okay. And we'll get into the responses to speech acts in a moment, but yes is okay, no is okay, and not now and not yet is okay. And it may be something that occurs in the future, or it may not be. But we can be confident in the people that we trust and care for that progress will be made. Maybe not in our image, but we can trust that something will be made. Okay, looking at time, I'm going to move on unless someone is burning and yearning to contribute. Any burns and yearns? Well, you muted everybody, so I guess what you're. So that's an implicit request, right? Just made to mute everybody. Okay, so that's great. So moving on, this is just what we talked about. So what a great segue. So possible responses to a request. Yes, of course. No. Commit to commit. So what that means is I can't say for sure yes or no right now. But I'm saying yes to when I can commit. So again, specificity is so important. I will let you know by 3 p.m. Wednesday after I check my calendar. Very clear about when you can expect an answer. Now, maybe you've heard of kicking the can down the road of, oh, and then at 3, oh, I can't commit yet, oh, I can't commit yet. That causes an issue. That causes a breakdown. So if you're genuine, make the commitment even though it's a no. And usually if someone's kicking the can or you find yourself kicking the can, usually that's a no. So have the courage to be clear, have the respect to be clear, and if the answer is no, you can just say no. And then the last option is renegotiating. I can't do this, I can't make that commitment, but I can do this. I can do something else. I understand why you're making this request, and I can help in the following ways. Okay, so then we go into commitments and promises. So you're making a commitment whenever you say you're going to do something, whether you realize that or not. So commitments, and we're modeling this, should be modeling this, are always to be taken seriously. So imagining that you're under oath. Every time you use the language of I'm committing to this, that might be a step beyond saying you're going to do something. Different cultures have different ways of saying, if you say this specific phrase or this specific words, that's like binding. So encourage you to find some phrase or find some word where that's the case. Something's under oath and binding. Your commitments should be clear, they should be actionable, and they should be as precise as you can possibly make them. So whether we keep or break commitments can impact trust, relationships, success, and the self-esteem of the person that you're making a commitment to. So here are some examples of commitments that people make all the time that sometimes are fulfilled and sometimes are broken. So we often make promises without realizing the inherent commitments. We will start the meeting at 9. I'll call you at 3. I'll get this to you by the end of the day. I will let you know if anything changes. Let's have lunch next week, or we'll talk about this later. So how often is it that we'll start the meeting at 9 really means we'll start it at 9:30? Or I'll call you at 3 becomes, I called you at 3:20. I'll get it to you by the end of the day, which means I'll get it to you in the next few days. Let's have lunch next week could be, oh, great to see you, but I gotta go. We'll talk this later may mean we're never gonna talk about this again. But we're saying if you're using commitments and speech acts with the intention of building other people, modeling good behavior, and building a culture of trust, then these are all commitments that are binding, that if you slip up on one, you need to be able to really work your way back to earn people's trust. Okay, and the breakdowns and the requests or commitments, hopefully they're obvious, but just to take a wide headline picture, if the requests, or commitments, or even offers are interpreted or disingenuous, if they are or interpreted as disingenuous, if they're unclear or unintentional, and if they don't have adequate accountability or follow-up. So oftentimes, most often, the breakdowns result from a lack of transparency or a fear of consequence. A fear of consequence of, I really want to say no, but I can't say no for a particular reason. That's why breakdowns happen. But there are opportunities for breakthroughs.
I literally got people.
I'm sorry?
Maya, didn't
What you got, veggie?
Yeah.
I take it.
We just did the same thing you just did.
I didn't know she was getting something to eat tonight. I picked up veggie.
Beth, can we mute?
Yeah, done.
Thank you. So there are opportunities for breakthroughs in that oftentimes breakdowns can continually happen and cause organizational issues. So having the conversation and addressing the truth, whatever the truth is, can create a big breakthrough in your relationship or even within your organization.
So then we get to this idea of holding accountability. And this is the key modeling piece, that we, in order to establish that trust, in order to model the behavior to others, that we will hold you accountable and we hold ourselves accountable, you can trust that what I say will happen. So we hold ourselves accountable for our commitments, modeling the behavior we're looking for in others. And so my quick story about that one, I work with an organization that historically, they have, they just would say, well, all of our meetings start late. We always start late. And a new CEO came along and he said, this is a culture where if we say we start at 9 and we don't, then it's just a matter of time before people stop believing other things we're saying. So if Jonathan says we start this meeting at 9, you can be sure that meeting will start at 9. And it is amazing how now everybody's showing up because they know the meeting is going to start at 9. And it's a small thing, right? But we show up in small things. We show up in small things. And as I hear myself say this, I'm thinking, I'm hoping I'm not making people who are listening to this feel guilty, because, right, we can't do anything about things that have already happened. It does happen that we have breakdowns, no problem. I mean, we know, we just have to deal with that when they happen. But the idea is to be extremely intentional about the commitments we make. I have another story. This is my unhappy story that I alluded to earlier. I was many years ago with my children at a Sesame Street playground, and they have a beautiful one in Pennsylvania. And I was with a bunch of other mothers, and one of them asked me to watch her daughter while she went to the restroom. And you probably know where this is going. I said, sure. I was not a committed listener, didn't see it as a commitment. And when she came back, she asked me where her daughter was. and the daughter was nowhere to be found. I mean, we did find her. We found her. She was, luckily, she had wandered away, and someone took her right immediately to the children's lost and found, because apparently that happens there at Sesame Street Place. But I have to tell you, I felt terrible, and it was one of those really painful lessons that had a good outcome, happily. It could have been terrible, but I really got the message that when I say I will, I really want to follow up and do the thing I say I'm going to do. I like to think that I model behavior based on my commitments and by holding my commitments. And when we can't keep, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just jump in 1 second. So I think one thing that I've heard is that sometimes people will say, you know, I do it on the big stuff and the stuff that matters. But there are so many more small examples than big examples that when the big examples come, all they have to go on for their expectation of you is how you've handled all the small examples.
Very true.
So they all count.
They all count.
It's not just the big ones.
Right, great point. And of course, when we can't keep a commitment, we just need to let the other people know before the deadline. You know, ideally before, if I say we'll start the meeting at 9 and it looks like we're not going to start the meeting at 9, hopefully at 10 of 9, I'm telling you, we're not going to start the meeting at 9. We're going to start it at 1/4 and here's why. Or if I say to you, I'm going to call you by the end of the day, and I know I'm not going to be able to do that, I let you know before the end of the day I'm not going to call you by that time, and I renegotiate. So that, yeah, it's going to happen that things change, and to what extent are we still honoring the relationship and the commitment by making sure that the communication is clear. And finally, we're very careful to make commitments that we know that we can and want to keep. This is important for those of us who are pleaser types, who want to say yes when we mean no, who agree to do things that we don't want to do, and then maybe feel resentful about it, right? So very, very important to be really clear with ourselves. Is this a commitment that I want to make? Is this a commitment that I can make? Is this a commitment that I want to keep? We're holding accountability ourselves. So now we want to ask you what your experience has been with commitments, with this idea that breakdowns are opportunities for breakthroughs. We'll open up the lines again to see if someone has a story of a breakdown in a commitment that led to a breakthrough, or a story of someone fulfilling on a commitment that really meant a great deal to you. So I'm going to open up the lines. I'm going to unmute everybody. So if you want to speak, go ahead and speak. Okay, that may not be.
We're gonna do 4 cookies. Here, you can have them. I gotta get some more.
All right, I think I'm going to do it a little differently. I'm going to mute everybody, and if you want to speak, just unmute yourself. Let's do it that way. Do remember to unmute yourself if you want to speak. So someone who has a story of a breakdown that led to a breakthrough, or someone fulfilling on a commitment that felt really good. I'm hoping there'll be some good examples.
Hi, it's Larissa Kimmel.
Hey, Larissa.
I am a people pleaser and willing to admit it. So I'm a type of person that has made many, many promises over the past, and there have been times in my professional career that I couldn't do everything that I said I wanted to do, even though I had the intention of really being strong about getting everything done. I would say the example is, a situation where I just could not fulfill all of the commitments, and I just had to own it and just say, listen, like, this is too much. I'm not able to do XYZ, but I can do the other thing. And it really taught me to be honest about whether I have time or not, and the willingness to participate.
That is a great story. So you came clean. You said, I can't fulfill on all these commitments, and I need to be honest with you. And is it an example where the relationship was improved because of that candor, Larissa?
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. Lovely story. Great. Who has another one?
I have one.
Go ahead, Ann.
My husband is famous for borrowing tools that I have. I got married later in life and I had lots of tools. And so my husband has plenty of tools too, but he misplaces them. And so he had bought me actually a drill and a whole bit set for Christmas one year. And he had started borrowing it again, and he did put it back. But I had said to him, I said, please don't, I'm okay with you borrowing it. Just make sure you put it back. And so just this past week, all of a sudden he comes with 2 brand new drills in a whole new package. And I was like, what's this? And he said, well, I kind of need your drill, the drill that I got you, because it's better for his work. And so I got you this brand new kit. So that was he was fulfilling a commitment to me. He didn't just take my stuff and then bring it back and then use it so much that I'm like, is it even mine anymore? He actually, went and bought me a brand new one, and he's making sure that I have it. So that felt really good.
Well, I love that. I mean, and how wonderful to have a woman who comes with her own tools. I think that's
right.
That
was my dowry. That was the joke that we had.
your dowry.
Well, just to make another point about that, how different would it have been if Anne said right away, you need to buy another drill if this is going to keep happening, right? That was not the request. She just made clear what her needs were, and he was able to arrive to that conclusion himself. So sometimes you just state what your needs are, and people can pull through in the way that works for them.
Yeah. And if they don't, if we're not clear and we do have to make a request, I think that's an opportunity to do it. So we really want to make these things very specific for you. Complaints can be addressed by requests, and we make commitments to people. We make promises to get things done, and we want to hold ourselves accountable. And this whole idea of time management, I want to throw a couple of things here as we come to the end of our time together. I think this is a really interesting saying, and some of you may have heard this, that time management is really commitment management. What is it we're saying yes to? What are the commitments we're making? And do we realize that we have more control often about how we manage our time than we think we do because of the commitments we're making? I know I've worked with people over the years who, when asked when they could get something done, would always imagine the best possible, if nothing happened, if nothing went wrong, I can have it to you by tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Well, when does that happen, right? How fast can you be here? We're going to meet at a restaurant. How fast can you get there? Oh, if there's no traffic. So really to remember that we really can help ourselves if we're careful in the commitments we make, if we give ourselves more than enough time, and if we make sure we do the most important things first. I want to end.
One last thing about this.
Sure, please.
So commitment management also means making time for yourself. So when we talk about commitments, we're not just talking about the commitments you're making to other people, but if you need a break or you need alone time, as we call it in my house, managing that commitment and making time for yourself has to be interwoven with all the commitments you're making to others.
Very nice. Thanks, Alex. And I have a request for you, Alex. If you could take a look at the chat. I haven't been able to look at it, but if there's anything to bring up at the chat when I read okay. So my last piece here for you is something that I really love. Let's see if I can get back in here to do this. There it is, the big rock. So when we were in York a couple of weeks ago, Nicole, one of the participants, alluded to this big rocks story, and I can only see a few of you. You may or may not know this one. This is a Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and First Things First. This is a story from First Things First, and every time I read this, people take something away from it. So I'm going to close our time together, and I thank you for your participation. Close our time together with reading. It's brief. It's not very long, just one sheet of paper. So I'll invite you to close your eyes. If you're comfortable, you can leave your eyes open. And I'll read you the story. This is called The Big Rocks of Life, and we'll make this available to you. One day, this expert was speaking to a group of business students, and to drive home a point, used an illustration I'm sure those students will never forget. After I share it with you, you'll never forget it either. As this man stood in front of the group of high-powered overachievers, he said, "Okay, time for a quiz." Then he pulled out a 1-gallon, wide-mouthed mason jar and set it on a table in front of him. Then he produced about a dozen fist-sized rocks and carefully placed them, one at a time, into the jar. When the jar was filled to the top and no more rocks would fit inside, he asked, "Is this jar full?" Everyone in the class said, "Yes." Then he said, "Really?" He reached under the table and pulled out a bucket of gravel. Then he dumped some gravel in and shook the jar, causing pieces of gravel to work themselves down into the spaces between the big rocks. Then he smiled and asked the group once more, "Is this jar full?" By this time, the class was on to him. "Probably not," one of them answered. "Good," he replied, and he reached under the table and brought out a bucket of sand. He started dumping the sand in, and it went into all the spaces left behind the rocks and the gravel. Once more, he asked the question, "Is this jar full?" "No," the class shouted. Once again, he said, "Good." Then he grabbed a pitcher of water and began to pour it in until the jar was full to the brim. Then he looked up at the class and asked, "What is the point of this illustration?" One eager beaver raised his hand and said, "The point is, no matter how full your schedule is, if you try really hard, you can always fit some more things into it." "No," the speaker replied, "that's not the point. The truth this illustration teaches us is, if you don't put the big rocks in first, you'll never get them in at all. If you don't put the big rocks in first, you'll never get them in at all." So we invite you to think about, what are the big rocks in your life? What are the big rocks in your life? What are they? And I invite you to jot them down. We won't have a conversation about this, but this is a big takeaway. What are the big rocks in your life? Is it exercise? Is it family? Is it getting that PhD? And, what is it? What are the big rocks in your life? And how do we make sure that we put them in first? So with that, I think we're on time. Thank you all so very, very much for being with us. We'll post this webinar. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I wish you all the best going forward. Any last words from Alex?
Yeah, thank you so much. This went by pretty quickly. We got good stories and engagement, so I'm pretty happy with it.
Good.
And I hope you guys are too.
Good. Thanks again, everyone, and we look forward to your feedback, and we'll post all this information. Let me see if I can quickly stop share. Here we go. There's everybody. Hello. And I'm going to, let's see if I can get you all I'm going to open up the lines, I hope. Let's see, unmute all so we can all say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of y'all day.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.